First, though, to our panel, I'm joined by the former Labor Advisor, now a Fellow at the McKell Institute, Darrin Barnett, and shortly we'll be joined by Parnell Palm McGuinness, Managing Director at the strategic communications firm Agenda C, former advisor to the Liberal Party. Darrin, first to you. The Labor Party, big focus today, including trying to suspend standing orders, all about the aged care crisis. Was that the right way to start the parliamentary proceedings? Not a long sitting ahead of the election, Darrin.
Well, I think aged care is a federal responsibility, and Labor will be trying to remind the public of that every day up until election day. It's certainly an area where the federal government probably hasn't been as strong as other portfolio areas, and I think people, and certainly those who've been personally affected by having relatives in aged care where essentially the places are in lockdown and they can't visit their loved ones, or heaven forbid those who've had family members or friends pass away. There are deficiencies in the system. There are difficulties getting a workforce organised, and there are some sort of cracks around that system. And unlike the fact that the state governments deliver the hospital networks, the aged care is a federal responsibility. So I think it gives us a reminder of what the flavour of Labor's attack campaign will be in these coming months.
They didn't go straight to the correspondence, which has created quite a stir in Canberra and elsewhere. First of all, from Gladys Berejiklian, reported at the Press Club last week by PVO, and then the Barnaby Joyce text message, which was leaked. They didn't go straight to that sort of correspondence. They wanted to go to the issue of policy substance, I guess, Darrin, before getting into that sort of character critique.
Well, I think that stuff takes care of itself. That if those text messages are out there and they're public, the media frenzy will take care of that. And it's really not a story about Labor and about being a political opponent. And let's be honest, if you start throwing stones, who knows what text messages are out there from the other side in the other direction. So you're best to try as a political party, I think, to stay out of the fray on that and try and find an area of weakness, which in this case is aged care. So I think it's a pretty smart strategy from Labor on day one.
Darrin, you were there, and I'm really interested to get your take on this, because you went through some difficult times within the Labor government at that period as an advisor then. It was not difficult for you necessarily, obviously a tough time for anyone involved, but it was a party ripping itself apart. From what you see now, how do you rate the performance of both sides, and do you see any similarities in what you're seeing with a government having some difficulties? Certainly you wouldn't write them off at all at this point, but some challenges to overcome for the Prime Minister.
He definitely has challenges, and there are some problems with a restive backbench. There are some policy failures and other things that need to be worked on. I think also that he bleeds left and right. That not putting up a bill for an integrity commission causes problems in moderate Liberal seats where independents may run, whereas aged care and other more sort of traditional policy areas could cause problems in the battle for seats with Labor. So unlike a lot of previous elections where there are certain seats that the Liberals would take for granted, I think there are problems in moderate seats that were not around in previous elections. And I know I was just watching the Monitor just before we came on air, and the seat of Higgins is a great example of that. When Kelly O'Dwyer was the member, and obviously Peter Costello and others, the primary vote was probably into the 50s, therefore didn't need to go to preferences. Granted, there was no incumbent last time, but the primary for Katie Allen was 47. If that drips down to about 45, 43, someone can come up the middle and take the seat from you. I don't see it as a Labor seat personally, but I do think that an independent, sort of in an Andrew Wilkie style way, with even around a 20% primary, who leapfrogs either Labor or the Greens and gets themselves into second spot, could cause some real problems in those seats. So, yeah, the Prime Minister does have big issues to solve, but every Prime Minister at this stage of the election cycle has big shoes to fill and big problems to solve, particularly when they're seeking, you know, a longer time in office than the Howard government. It's not a new government anymore.
Indeed, and Parnell Palmer-McGuinness will join us shortly. She's just getting organised now in terms of the studio, so we'll talk to her in a moment. But Darrin, do you see this as almost a reverse of 2019, where Shorten was pulled in every direction and under a lot of pressure from the left, and then with the Adani convoy and so on from the right with Palmer? This time, the Palmer spend and, preferencing, say, candidates in Herbert or Capricornia, preferencing them last, these could have material impacts on election day, couldn't they?
They could, and I think you'll find that the final 10 seats to fall, it could be a candidate who picks up 6 to 10% of the primary vote, whose preferences determine the winner. So what Clive Palmer does matters. And each seat has to be taken on its merits. But look, I think 2019 to me, frankly, the protest movement was so sure that Shorten would win that they were jockeying for what they would do when Labor was in government, and they forgot to win the election first. And they were so sure that Labor was going to win that their campaigning was more about what would Labor do in government. And Scott Morrison, I thought, rode off the coattails of that beautifully and said, well, this isn't a referendum on the government. This is what Labor would do. We remember what Labor has done. But I'm not sure that Mr Morrison's going to get away with that this time. I think certainly the expectations of Anthony Albanese are a little lower, and not to say that they're bad, but they're a little lower than the expectations come election day for Shorten. And that's not a bad place to be if you're in opposition. Underdog status is a really valuable thing.